Environmental Learning Center at Clackamas Community College. I'm Maggie, an educator here at the ELC, and this is week 5 of our Wildlife in the Watershed live stream series, where each week we learn about a different animal that calls the wetland their home. We've already learned about raccoons and mallards and great blue herons and many more, but today we're going to be learning about salamanders. Have you ever seen a salamander before? They're super cool creatures, and they find food, water, shelter, and space here at the ELC. But most importantly, they find a place to raise their young. So salamanders need cool, slow-moving water in order to lay their eggs in them. And wetlands like here at the ELC are the perfect place for them to do that. So we actually have quite a few salamanders here at the ELC, specifically the northwestern salamander, and I'm very excited to be showing you all types of cool things. So we're going to be learning about how to find a salamander, sleuth one out yourself. We're going to be talking about their lifespan, and then also taking a look at an egg mass, or a collection of eggs that I actually found in the water to show you guys. So very exciting. The ELC here is a wetland, and a wetland is an area of land that is covered in water. And the coolest thing about wetlands is the fact that they slow down, cool off, and filter water, resulting in a really slow-moving, cool, clean environment for all types of plants and animals to live, including our friend the salamander. A few things before we get started. I'd like to introduce Michelle once again as our camera person and also the one monitoring the Zoom chat. So if you have any questions about salamanders at any point during this live stream, please make sure to put them in the chat, and I will take time at the end to answer them all. And you should also hopefully have an activity sheet in front of you. So this week's activity sheet is titled Sleuthing Out Salamanders, and it is a fill in the blanks all about northwestern salamanders, which are the most commonly spotted salamanders here at the ELC. So make sure to keep an eye out for all of these fun facts. And also at the bottom, there's a question about the habitat needs of the northwestern salamander and the role that they play. So make sure to think about that as well, and how everything is connected here at the wetland. But firstly, before we get into that, what exactly even is a salamander? You might have not have seen one before, so let's take a quick look. So salamanders are amphibians. You've probably heard the word amphibian before to refer to frogs, because they also are amphibians. And basically, those are a type of animal that is cold-blooded, and that goes through a metamorphosis, or a complete change or transformation in their body. So this typically refers to an animal that begins their life living in the water, using gills or some other technique to breathe underwater. And then as they develop into adults, they actually leave the water and lose their gills and gain the ability to breathe on land. So frogs do this. They go from tadpoles into adult frogs, and most salamanders do the same thing. So as you can see from the photos, salamanders have smooth, moist skin, very similar to frogs. They also have those kind of bulging eyes from this photo, as you can see, very similar to frogs as well. But instead of being in a frog shape, they're more in a lizard shape. So they have a body and a head, a long tail, and 4 legs, very similar to the shape of a lizard. Some live on land, some live in water, some live on land and on water at various times in their life. Salamanders are also carnivores, meaning that they only eat other animals. So when they're in the water, they will be eating little bugs and macroinvertebrates that live in the water. Sometimes even they'll eat small fish. And then when on land, they will eat slugs and snails and worms and all types of different insects. Anything that they can really get their little mouths on, they'll eat. And there are about 20 different species of salamanders in Oregon, and a lot of them that we're going to be talking about today are very particular to the Pacific Northwest. So you're not able to find them anywhere else, and I think that makes them super cool and super unique. So now that we have an idea of what a salamander is, have you ever seen a salamander in person before? I've only seen a salamander in person a couple times in my life. Once when I was really young, messing around in some fallen leaves in a forest. Me and my friends came across a northwestern salamander. And another time, during the summer, I was sticking my feet in a lake to cool off, and I saw some salamanders swimming around my feet. So the reason why we don't typically see salamanders very often, despite them being really common in a lot of places, is, well, firstly, they need to be near a body of water, a really moist wetland area. So that could be a lake or a pond or a creek even. But also they are either typically in the water, and it's hard to find them in the water, or they're underground. So they'll be hidden underneath fallen leaves. They'll be in the burrows of rodents, or a lot of times they will be hiding underneath logs or bark or sticks or whatever. So because of that, in order to find a salamander, you really got to sleuth around and you really got to take a look around. So there are plenty of northwestern salamanders here at the ELC. And although I wasn't able to find one this morning, I was able to find one a few days ago. So let me show you a quick clip of a northwestern salamander that I found right here at the ELC. Okay, so what I did was I found this log and I pushed the log over. And so as you can see, there's this log here, and then there's the indent in front of the log of where it used to be. And when I looked down into this indent, I was able to spot a little northwestern salamander. Can you see it? It's nice and shiny. A really dark brown color, and it's staying very still. It's hoping that I won't notice that it's there. But in order to give you guys a better look, I went ahead and grabbed a little bit of leaves and picked it up. So the reason why I used leaves as sort of a barrier between me and the salamander is because us humans, we put all types of things on our hands that could potentially harm a salamander. So I wanted to keep a nice barrier of leaves between me and them. But look at that. You can see all the little details of that little guy. And when putting him back, I didn't put it back where I found it because that risks me accidentally squishing it with the log when I'm putting it back. So if you ever take a salamander out from underneath a log, make sure to place it really close by where you found it, but not somewhere where you could accidentally squish it. I also ended up putting a couple leaves on top of this guy as well, just to protect him from any predators swooping down and eating him before he makes his way back under the log. But cool. So yeah, I hope you'll take some time to go to a place like the ELC or some other wetland and go sleuthing for some salamanders. It's really fun to find them. But the locations where you look for them is actually different depending on the time of year because of their life cycle. So let's go ahead and take a quick look at what the life cycle of a salamander really looks like. So if you've ever seen the life cycle of a frog, you're probably very familiar with this kind of life cycle. You know, frogs go from eggs to tadpoles to growing legs and leaving the water and becoming frogs. And most salamanders are very similar. So we've got here on the right the eggs, which are laid by the adult salamanders in the water, and then it develops and it breaks through and it becomes larva. So on the bottom there you can see larva, and you can see how next to its eyes, it looks like it almost has ears sticking out, but those aren't ears, they're actually gills. So they're external gills on the outside of their body rather than inside of their body like most fish. And that allows them to get oxygen underwater. So this larva is swimming around, eating all types of little microinvertebrates, perhaps a little tiny fish occasionally, and it starts to grow little legs. And then those legs get bigger and bigger, and its gills start to shrink back into its head, and then it eventually has no gills left, and it looks like an adult salamander, and it will leave the water and live the rest of its life on land, eating snails and slugs and all those other things that I mentioned. So super cool stuff. The amount of time that it takes for all this life cycle to happen is pretty interesting. So depending on the season, you'll actually see salamanders in slightly different places. This cycle also has frogs on it as well as comparison, but we're just focusing on salamanders today. So right now during the winter, adults are becoming active and making their way to the water in order to lay their eggs. So right now you can find plenty of egg masses here at the ELC in kind of shallower bits of water with strong sticks because they attach their egg masses to strong sticks. Those egg masses eventually hatch into larvae, which are swimming around in the water and eating food. during the spring and summer. And then from summer to autumn, the metamorphosis begins where they start to grow into their adult forms and leave the water. And then the cycle all repeats again. So I want to show you a couple really cool species that you also might run into if you're looking for, I don't know, looking for different salamanders here. I want you to be able to recognize them when you see them. So here is a rough-skinned newt, which is a newt is just a specific type of salamander. And this guy has really bumpy skin. He seems a little less slimy than the others. But the coolest thing about this guy is the fact that he has a bright orange belly. So these salamanders are brown on top, which helps them with camouflage and to blend in with the ground. But then the underbelly of the salamander is bright orange. And so bright colors have been used quite often by prey animals to show their predators that they're poisonous. It's like a big warning sign of like, I'm toxic, please don't eat me. And because this is on the underside of their belly, they will actually lift their head up and curl their tails over so that you can see that bright orange color when they feel threatened, which is super interesting. This is what it looks like in its egg. You can see the egg is developing into a little baby salamander inside of there, which is so interesting. So that one is pretty soon going to break out of its little egg and start swimming around as larvae. Another type of salamander I wanted to show you guys is the Pacific giant salamander, which the rough-skinned newt that I just showed you is roughly 8 inches long, while this Pacific giant salamander is roughly 13 inches long. So it's a very big salamander. And my favorite fact about this huge salamander is the fact that they are I think the only salamander known to growl. So salamanders don't have very good ears. They only have internal ears. They tend to just listen to sound by feeling the vibrations of sound in their body. But it isn't common for salamanders to make noise, because if they can't hear noise, why would they make a noise? But this guy growls like a lot of other animals when they feel threatened, which I think is just so incredibly cool. And here is it in its larva stage in the water. As you can see, its gills on this one are shrinking a little bit and going back into their head. So I think this one is getting pretty close to being able to leave the water. Another type of salamander commonly seen here is the long-toed salamander. Now this guy is a lot smaller. So I think this one's only about 6 centimeters long rather than inches. And so if you see this guy next to another salamander, he's going to look like a little baby, but that is its adult size. And it has this nice yellow marbling on its back and some really long toes, which is why its name's that. And then, of course, our favorite northwestern salamander. This is the guy I showed you underneath that log. And the guy that I'm about to show some egg masses of, which is very exciting. So this guy is about 8 inches long as well. He has a really cool ability to release a white toxin from its skin in order to protect itself. So if you ever see this guy covered in like a weird white substance, that's what it's doing. It's feeling threatened and protecting itself. And you'll often see this guy under logs and other various cool places. So let's take a look at a real life egg mass that I have just taken from the water here today. So I was able to find quite a few different egg masses all across the ELC just on my quick walk this morning. I think I saw at least 4 of them, which is super exciting. But I went ahead and broke one off of its stick in the water in order to show you guys it nice and up close. So this is a northwestern salamander egg mass. And it's actually 2 different egg masses. So the one here closer to the base of the stick, as you can see, the eggs are a little bit smaller. And then the big mass near the end of the stick actually has a lot larger eggs, and the little baby salamanders inside actually seem to be a little bit more developed. So I think this guy was laid a little bit earlier than this one because it seems to be a little bit further along in its development. But yeah, salamander will go into the water, lay its eggs on a really strong stick in order to keep it attached. in about, I don't know, like 15 inches of water. And it will stay there, and the eggs will develop and eventually hatch into larvae. As you can see, there's quite a bit of brown on this guy. That's just mud and things in the water getting on it. So if you ever look around the ELC or anywhere else for egg masses, it's going to look like a pretty brown blob. It won't look like completely clear. But yeah, that's what an egg mass looks like. I'm so excited that I was able to show you guys a northwestern salamander egg mass. Okay. Alrighty, I'm so happy that I was able to show you guys all these cool northwestern salamanders here at the ELC, as well as a couple other species that you might find here. And I hope that this has inspired you to go out searching for your own salamander. Salamanders are a really important indicator species, which is a type of species that shows when pollution has entered an area. So if, let's say, for example, the ELC gets really polluted, one of the first animals that would disappear from here would be salamanders. So even though birds would probably be able to make it, squirrels would probably still be here, the salamanders leaving shows us that there's something wrong early on, which is really important. So having clean, nice wetlands, protected wetlands are super important for salamander populations and for the ecosystem as a whole. But yeah, I would like to spend a little bit of time answering any of your questions about salamanders if you have any. Okay, one question that, oh yeah. That's a great question. Someone asked, are axolotls salamanders? That is a super great question. And the answer, I believe, is yes. They live in Mexico, so we didn't talk about them here today. But yeah, some salamanders never leave the water, which is something that I didn't really talk about. But oftentimes if a body of water stays year round, so it doesn't dry up in the summer, and that there's plenty of food in there for the salamander, oftentimes it won't bother leaving to go on land because it's like, hey, I've got everything that I need just right here. So I think axolotls are one of those salamanders that stays in the water for their whole life.
What is the longest salamander and what other types are in the northwest?
Someone asked, what is the longest salamander and what are the types that are in the northwest? So the Pacific giant salamander that I showed you guys that gets like 13 inches long is the largest one here in the Pacific Northwest. But there are ginormous salamanders in the world. I recommend you look it up. There's one in Japan that gets like 4 feet long, and it's honestly pretty like wild to look at. So I recommend you look that up. But as for the ones here in the Northwest, yes, there's roughly like 20 species here in Oregon. And I also recommend that you look more into those because they're all super unique and interesting.
Do salamanders have any special mating ritual?
That's a good question. Someone asked, do salamanders have any sort of mating ritual? So the way salamanders mate is actually pretty interesting. The male will go into the water and leave a sort of like sperm sac thing. And then the female will come at a different time and just insert her eggs into that thing. So I don't believe the male or the females really interact with each other, except for bringing their genetics together to create the eggs in the water. But great question. Alrighty, thank you so much for all your amazing questions. I'm so glad that you're interested in salamanders. And again, I recommend you look into all types of different unique species because they're all so different and interesting. But I hope you'll join us next time to learn about coyotes. But until then, please take care, get outside, and respect all those who live there. All right, until then, bye.